Hi everyone, I'm so glad that you can join me. Today's card features a couple of new products from the Meraki Hugs release. The new addition to the Artisan Flora Dies Collection rose is absolutely gorgeous. I love the Meraki Moments Hugs die set. This 3-piece die set can be layered with different combinations and some layers used on their own. I'll start off with the background. I have a panel of very dark green cardstock that measures 4 1/4 inches by 5 1/2 inches, A2 size. The rose die set consists of 4 dies. There are 3 dies for the flowers. One cuts the rose, the others the bud and the smaller flower. No guessing which die cuts go with which flower. The die that I'm using right now cuts the foliage. I've used this to cut a light green cardstock several times and adhering those leafy branches on the background to create a collage. And surprisingly, I cut the exact number that I needed. When I'm done, I'll flip it over to trim off those overhanging pieces. As I cut, I press the blade right up against the panel's edge so that I get a nice flush cut. Then I'll take all these little bits and pieces that I trimmed off and fill in the areas where it's needed. These lighter leaves pop off of that dark green panel. After I've added in all these bits and pieces, I'll do another trim. Now on to the rose. Inside the packaging, there's step-by-step illustrative instructions showing you how to put these layers together. I'll start off with the die for the main flower, which I've cut from Bristol Smooth cardstock. Before I apply the color, I'm first going to stack all of my die cuts together in the order in which they're going to be layered. The larger die cuts, there's a couple of reference points that can be used. Look at the shape of each die cut. There will be 1 or 2 areas that will be the same as the previous layers, and so I match those up. For the larger die cuts, there's a second point of reference, and that is a die cut triangle. The smaller die cuts, I not only rely on the shape of the die cut and how it relates to the previous one, but I also refer to the guide. And as soon as I have this rose completely layered up and there's many beautiful details, then it'll be much easier for me to figure out where to put the color. Using blending brushes to apply Distress Oxide inks, Kitsch Flamingo as my dark tone for shadow areas, and Sponge Sugar for my light tone. Because the die cuts are temporarily layered up, it's easy to determine where the base of the petal is. It's the base where I'll add my shadow area using the Kitsch Flamingo, and then I'll blend it out lightly, not quite to the petal's edge, using Sponge Sugar. Leaving a little bit of white space will create a bright highlight. And I just continue working through all of the die cuts, looking carefully to see where the base of the petal is, adding in my dark tone, and then blending it out with the light tone. Coloring with inks and blender brushes is a quick and easy job. For this die cut, which is going to sit on top as a furled edge for one of the petals, I'll just use the light tone. This die cut creates the detail of the center of the flower, and I'll use just a little bit of the light tone on top and follow it up with a dark tone at the bottom. And the previous detail piece will sit on top of this one, so I do it a light pink. And the last 3 die cuts are, of course, the large ones, and I'll apply that dark pink to the base of each of them, blend it out with the soft pink, making sure to leave some white space at the top. There are 3 die cuts that will create the bud. The larger one I've done in the dark pink because it will be peeking through the other one that is going to be layered on top. The second layer, I'll start off with just a touch of the dark tone at the base and blend it out with the light tone. It's a tiny die cut that I'm going to leave white because it's going to be a furled edge on the top right-hand side of this die cut. The small flower has a number of die cuts, and so like the rose, I'm going to go ahead and layer those up before I start inking. And I found by following this process, it actually helps when it comes to putting the rose together because you already know where the pieces are going to go and how they're going to layer one onto the other. For these smaller die cuts, I find it easier to hold the pieces with my craft pick as I apply the ink. I follow the same process, using the layered die cuts as a way of determining where the base is, applying the dark color to the base, blending it out with the spun sugar, and where there's a petal's edge, leaving some white space. The bud with its 3 die cuts is easily assembled. For the second layer has been adhered to the base. Then I'm adding a dot of glue, and using a jewel picker, I'm going to pick up that little furled edge and tuck it into place. The small flower has multiple pieces, so I first lay them out in the order in which they're going to be assembled. First 4 layers have that triangular die cut like the main rose did. Aligning this die cut ensures that the layers are positioned correctly as the layers go together. And this detail die cut will line up right to the top of the last die cut that was put in place. The last 2 die cuts will align to the bottom of the first die cut where it's overhanging the ones that are layered on top. I first adhere the one that is on the right-hand side, and I pick it up so that I can manipulate it a little bit to ensure that it is aligned to the outline of the base die cut. And the last die cut goes on the other side and will also cover up that triangular die cut. I know exactly where it's going, so I add some adhesive and pop it in place, and that completes the small rose. And like the small rose, I first lay out all of my pieces for the large rose to start assembling them. Adhesive is applied just to the bottom of this die cut. When I adhere it to the first layer, I'm going to line up the petals on the right-hand side and then work towards that triangular die cut, lining that up. And then I'll take 2 of the larger foam squares and pop those between the 2, giving it some nice dimension. For the next layer, I'll line up the bottom of the profile with that on the previous one. I'm going to add adhesive again just to the bottom around that triangular die cut. It is positioned on the right, and then the triangle is aligned. And again, I'll pull up the top of that die cut and then slip a foam square in. For this next die cut, it will be adhered flat, lining it up to the top of the previous die cut. For the next layer, it is going to be lined up with the 2 points that are on either side but just below the previous die cut. I'll line it up on the left-hand side first and then bring it across to the right-hand side. The little furled edge is going to line up directly to the bottom of the last die cut. Bowl-shaped layer is going to cover up that triangular die cut. I lined this one up at the top with the profile that is on either side of one of the previous layers. Next layer, which is another furled edge for the petal, will line up directly at the top of the previous die cut. The last layer is a petal that is going to line up with the bottom left-hand side of the rose. I'm using my craft pick just to pick up that previous die cut so I can slip it slightly underneath. Again, adhesive will be applied at the bottom of the die cut, and then I'll add in a couple of small foam squares before I slip it into place. A little bit of adhesive will be added below that bowl-shaped die cut, and then I'll use reverse tweezers to hold it until the adhesive dries. This will allow that last petal to sweep up from its base, giving it a more natural appearance. A bed of leaves has been created out of darker green cardstock for the roses to sit on. The bud and the smaller rose have been attached to the stems. Adhesive was placed just down that central stem of the leaves so that some of those leaves could be popped up with foam squares, as is the bud and the small flower. Main rose with all of its dimension will be adhered flat to the card front. Some texture was added to the petal edges using Nouveau Stone Drops Chalk White. After the medium has been placed on the petal, then I just use my finger to flatten it out. Die for the lettering from the Meraki Moments Hugs die set was used to cut both pink cardstock and white sheet foam. Before the stacked letters were tucked into the greenery, I added in some chunky glitter on the top half of the letters and also on a few of the leaves. Hope you enjoyed this video featuring Crafty Meraki's newest addition to the Artisan Flora Dies Collection, Rose. Who would have thought these beautifully layered blooms are so easily put together? Thank you for visiting, and as always, I appreciate your visit.